Welcome to In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson. Join Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible, both from Milligan College, as they bring you their thoughts and knowledge of the study of the Sunday School lesson for the day. Now, here is Dr. Gwaltney.
Good morning. In the Christian calendar, this Sunday is Pentecost Sunday, the birthday of the church. And so we're beginning a new unit, a new quarter. And the quarter is God's urgent call. And we're going to begin our look at characters in the Bible who answered God's call by going to the book of Judges in the Old Testament, and we're going to be looking at 4 characters who were known as judges. So we have our work cut out for us in terms of going way back into Israel's history. Lee, I'm glad you're here to help out on this travel into the distant past.
Right. Well, when I was a kid and read the book of Judges, I wondered, where are all the judges? Because there aren't any judges in the book of Judges.
As you thought of judges.
By my definition. Or
Right.
maybe I should make one exception. Deborah did function, the subject of our lesson today, somewhat as a court magistrate, the way we use the word judges. So I think we're going to have to redefine the word judges for this book.
They didn't walk around in black robes.
Black robes
with a gavel, sitting up on a high elevated place
So help
in
us,
a courtroom.
Right. So help us out with this word here. Why are they called judges, and what was their function?
Well, I guess when we wanted to put the Old Testament into another language, we had to come up with some word that equaled the term that's used in Hebrew. Shaphat isn't describing necessarily a person who renders a decision in a case of law, although some of them did, and Deborah did.
Yeah.
What the word means, and here I'll go back to a definition I made up long ago. It's a charismatic military leader called by God, who is moved by the Spirit of God to act in some desperate situation, some dangerous situation for the people of Israel.
Okay. And by charismatic, you mean highly gifted from God with certain gifts.
Yes.
And they were. Well, that's good. So these, I think the core of your definition is military leader. These judges were mainly military leaders.
Sometimes, though, they were independent. Like we're going to start with Deborah and Barak this morning. The one who was the judge right before those two was Ehud, the left-handed judge, who never raised a military force to attack the enemy. He went as just one person.
He was an assassin. He accomplished his...
He was an assassin.
He was an assassin.
Well, that's putting it rather bluntly.
Yeah, I know.
But correctly.
That is pretty much what he did.
Well, and take Samson, which will be number 4.
Yeah. He also acted independently.
Yeah. He was a one-man army.
Right.
So, but most of them did, in fact, raise troops. Now, we probably need to say a few words about the way in which these Israelites were organized, you might say politically and socially in those very early days.
Yeah. The Israelites had a strong leader for decades. First, Moses was their leader, and then Joshua for another 3 decades. But we've entered a time now in Israelite history where there is no obvious strong leader to whom that all the tribes look to.
Right.
And so we've entered a time both of, I guess they would have had the illusion of security because they've entered the promised land now and they've received their tribal allotments and they've moved to their homes.
But in another way, it was less secure.
Yeah.
Because when they were a bunch of desert semi-nomadic people moving around, they were, the desert wasn't empty of other people exactly, but they were very few and far between. And so Moses was one, and Joshua likewise, who had learned his skill from leadership skill from Moses. They were able to pull these different groupings, tribes and clans together to survive in very different, but in a way of speaking, they did not have as many problems in the desert as they had when they then crossed into the more populated area of Canaan.
Yeah. Well,
now
the Promised Land...
That put a different kind of stress on their leadership.
The Promised Land was not an empty land. It was just full of all kinds of people groups. And when they settled there, they drove many of them out to the fringes, but they were not happy with that situation. They were eager to get back into their fields and to their homelands. So there was constant warfare.
They splintered. What had been a fair amount of unity under Moses and Joshua then splintered into more tribal and clan situations where each clan family had to protect itself without a whole lot of help from others.
So what we're going to see among these judges, although some worked individually like Ehud and Samson, and some would raise up soldiers from one tribe to solve a threat.
Yes.
Some of these judges showed themselves at their best in their ability to make at least a small coalition of tribes in order to fend off a foe.
And that's what we have with Deborah and Barak.
A coalition.
It's a coalition, and Deborah seems to have been very much the magnet that allowed these people to trust one another enough to be able to work together against a common foe.
Yeah. So, in summary, this is a period in between Moses and Joshua and then the rise of the kings.
Yes.
This is a period in which there's no national unity. There's just tribal coalitions at best, and serious threats from neighboring tribes, many of them, or city-states, wanting to regain control of Canaan, the Promised Land, where the Israelites have arrived.
Well, another thing, a part of the situation they confronted when they moved into the Promised Land was that even in the people who had been there before Israel came along, there was no unity among them. They had never been a one government overall, the land. The closest thing probably they came to that was under Egyptian control earlier, before the Israelites showed up. But even that broke down. And we know that there was fighting and struggles against various city-states, even under that circumstance. It was actually David, believe it or not, who first brought unity to the entire land. And that David is way out in the future.
That's centuries yet ahead.
Yes.
Well, one more thing to kind of set the context for our study in the book of Judges here is that many people have noted a sad cycle that takes place throughout this period. It gets repeated.
There are elements of it in Joshua, but really it's very clear in the book of Judges.
So let's start with, you can start a cycle anywhere, I guess, but let's say that the people are experiencing a peace, and they're going about their daily lives and worshiping Yahweh, recognizing His sovereignty pretty well. But then they start to slip into disobedience.
And it focuses on the established religious establishment that is already in the land before they arrive.
Right.
There's the big bugaboo.
Yeah. So they start by disobedience. We mainly mean idolatry.
Yes.
Where they start, as you say, worshiping the gods and goddesses of these neighboring tribes and the city-states that were among them. In response to that disobedience, God allows oppressors to come upon them. That is, people start attacking them, usually neighboring peoples.
Yeah.
We're not talking here about invasions by an empire like Assyria or Egypt. We're talking about neighboring tribes.
And that comes later.
Yeah. Then that oppression is followed by crying out to God for help, and God raises up a judge, that is a deliverer, a military leader who will rescue them from that circumstance.
Another term that is used for this individual is savior. Mm-hmm. It's the word to save, mm-hmm. and it's a participle, so that it is the person who saves us. Mm-hmm. Now, we Christians are likely to think this is referring to personal salvation. Mm-hmm. In the Old Testament, it is not.
Right.
It means that an enemy has come against you and your family and your clan and your tribe, and they are going to wipe you out, drive you out, mm-hmm. and kill you or whatever. And somebody has got to step in and show some strength and leadership and protect you against physical subjugation, enslavement, or even death. And that's the role of the judge.
Good. And sometimes we say deliverance or a deliverer.
Yes.
Just to remind ourselves, we're not talking about personal spiritual salvation.
Now, the word redeemer in their culture meant something entirely different.
Okay.
This is not the redeemer.
This is a deliverer.
This is the deliverer, yes.
Well, let's take a look at the subject of our lesson today, Deborah and her associate, Barak, here.
Yes.
We'll get to meet them. So I'll start reading in Judges chapter 4, verse 1. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim, because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to the Lord for help. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands." Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." "Certainly I will go with you," said Deborah, "but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. There Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him.
This is just the beginning of the story. There's a whole lot more to the story, which we'll get into in a minute.
Yeah.
But we do need to go back to the opening of this short narrative, which occupies chapters 4 and 5 in Judges.
The opening verses give us a good reminder of that cycle that we were talking about.
Yes.
The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and then we meet the oppressor of the moment, Jabin, king of the Canaanites. And then we see the Israelites being oppressed and crying out for help at the end of verse 3. And then in verse 4, God raises up the deliverer.
Correct.
There's the cycle
right there. All right, now let's talk about some of these people and places. Ehud was the left-handed prophet who went over there and killed the king of Moab.
He was the last judge who's talked about in this story prominently.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now that cycle sets in. And now the domination of the Israelites goes to this Jabin, king of Canaan, whose seat of authority was in this city of Hazor, or Hatzor, however you want to pronounce it.
And that's
Israeli-like or English-like.
And that's way up north.
It is, north of the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah. So this is a northern king. He would have been the king of the city-state of Hatzor.
Yes.
Right? He's not king of all the Canaanites.
But at this time, he has hegemony of that northern district.
That northern region, okay.
And Hazor has been thoroughly excavated and has even more recently been excavated further by archaeologists. And we know very much about the city, the size of it, the power of it, gods and goddesses worshipped there by the Canaanites and all the rest. It was a powerful city.
Okay.
And
so it's a major threat to the Israelite people living among those northern tribes.
Yes.
Of which Naphtali and Zebulun were two.
Exactly.
Of the northern tribes.
That's true. And Asher is up there also. But we don't, in this part of the narrative, we don't hear anything about that tribe.
Okay.
Or Issachar either. But we will hear about them in chapter 5, the Song of Deborah. Now, the situation there is further complicated by the intrusion of this general of the army named Sisera. Now, Jabin is obviously of a Semitic origin. His name is a good Semitic name. Sisera's name is, however, not. And the present thinking is that he seems to have been connected with the sea people. Philistines were one of the sea peoples. And he seems to have been a military man with for that time, a vast army.
So he could have been like kind of a mercenary general with his own private army who's been hired by Jabin to...
you hit it right on the nose.
To be his force up in the north there.
Now his fortification, his center is Haroshet HaGoyim. That's a very interesting name. The word Haroshet means a forge or a smithy.
Like a blacksmith shop.
Right. And Goyim means of the Gentiles, of the foreigners.
Okay.
So it is thought nowadays that Sisera had been maybe of Philistine stock, and he had been hired. Now this location is thought to be a bit south and only 10 miles from the Mediterranean Sea. So here they are. And he is the one who then acts militarily to subjugate the Israelites.
Yeah. And one of the great advantages that they have is not only numbers, but they have chariots, which Israelites don't appear to have much availability of.
And fitted with iron.
And they've got iron.
And we know that the Philistines, the sea peoples, were those who came into Canaan with the ability to work iron.
Yeah.
So again, that points in that direction.
So they've got strength in all kinds of ways. Now in verse 4 we come to Deborah, who is the main character in our story here. And what a woman she is. Over in chapter 5, which is the poetic retelling of this story, she's called the Mother in Israel. A Mother in Israel. I just think that's such a fascinating title. And she plays many, many different roles. The first one that's mentioned here is prophet.
She's a prophetess.
Yes, not all judges were prophets.
Right.
But Deborah is.
Right.
And first and foremost, a prophet. And we see her speaking the word and will of God into the situation here, giving Barak, the general, godly advice as a prophet.
And she speaks as the mouthpiece for God to Barak. And I want to make a comment about what, now Barak in verse 8 sounds like a first-class chicken. By the way, his name means lightning.
Okay.
Her name means
Deborah
honeybee.
is a bee.
And
yeah.
he says, if you'll go with me, I'll go. If you won't go with me, I won't go. It sounds like he's kind of a chicken.
Yeah, it does.
But that's not the point at all.
Okay.
The point is that she is the one who is capable of delivering God's will to him, and he is not going to go without having someone speaking to him in God's name as to what to do.
That's very helpful.
In other words, he is being exactly opposite of what King Saul was later. When Saul acted without Samuel's presence and got chastised for it.
Yeah, there's a prominent moment where they're getting ready for a major battle, and Samuel has told Saul, wait till I get there, till we can go through the proper religious rituals, and Saul just won't wait. He takes matters into his own hands, and off they go. But Barak is acting appropriately here, you're suggesting.
Yes.
So
he is saying, you have the voice of God, and I'm not going to go into it's obvious why he doesn't want to go. I mean, he has an army of farmers and shepherds. They don't have any warlike equipment. And they're going against probably an army as good as any army in the world. He is at a terrible disadvantage in going. He said, I don't stand a chance against this kind of an army. And unless God leads us in this battle, we're sunk.
Good.
That's what
so he's respecting Deborah's prophetic role in doing this.
Yes.
The next thing we learn about Deborah back in verse 4 is that she's married, she's a wife, and
a mother.
And then it says she was leading Israel at this time. Now that's kind of an unusual statement because, as we've already said, most of these judges had either tribal leadership or at most regional tribal coalition. But it looks like Deborah is widely respected throughout the tribes of Israel.
Yes.
As a leader.
And her base of operations is way farther south, right in the dead center of Canaan. They're between Bethel and Ramah.
Okay.
So that's her locale.
Yeah. And here we see that she did function as a judge in our terms here. She
presiding over court
people
cases.
came to her and she made legal decisions on their behalf. And that's something that the other judges didn't do either. So that's yet another role for
and not
her.
only that, but she predicts something. She says to Barak, on the course that you're taking, you will not get the honor. A woman will get the honor, and we're likely to think that's Deborah, but it's not.
Yeah. And that's going to be the rest of the story that we'll mention here.
Yeah,
so.
and we don't even have a full amount of time to tell the rest of the story. But
well, I just wanted to highlight all of the fascinating roles that Deborah plays here beyond any of the other judges in this book.
Now, when we go to chapter 5, which is not in the printed text, we get the rest of the story. Yeah. And what happened was that Barak takes his ragtag army of guys with clubs and pitchforks and goes into the valley of Esdraelon, and the Kishon River flows through it. And at the very time the battle is ready to begin, there comes this torrential rainstorm.
So that bogs down the chariots and the armed soldiers of the Canaanites.
Right.
And all their horses pulling the chariots. And that shifts the advantage over to this ragtag, roughly armed group of Israelites from up north.
So the fact that they aren't heavily armed is their advantage.
Now to their advantage.
And they just really have a horrendous victory, big victory.
So they rout the Canaanites.
Yeah.
The general runs away, Sisera, whom we met,
Yeah.
this great warlord, and
heads back north.
Finds what he thinks is safety among a band of Kenite people who are camped up north there.
And they're semi-nomadic people.
Right,
They're pastoralists.
Right. Yes.
And they have connections with Moses.
Yeah. And now we meet the last major character of our story, Jael. Now her name is very significant, isn't it?
Yael in Hebrew means Yah as in hallelujah. Yahweh is God.
Yahweh is God. So she seems to know of the Israelite God and to worship the Israelite God. And so he picks the wrong tent to go in, Sisera, the Canaanite.
Well, as it's put, he asked for water and she gave him milk.
Yeah.
And he fell asleep in her tent.
Yeah.
And she took a tent peg and a hammer and pegged him down.
Pegged him down, drove
Killed
it
him.
through his temple into the ground. And the book of, in the 5th chapter tells his death very dramatically. And so here we see a typical story of God raising up a leader, in this case, 2 leaders in a sense,
Yes.
Deborah and Barak, to be the agents of deliverance of a certain group of tribes from a military threat, a serious military threat.
And the threat from the Philistine direction, even though he's not identified as such in the text, we kind of think that he was, is again dealt another blow.
Right.
Pardon the pun.
But we're going to see further conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines.
Yeah.
A little later on.
They're one of the major enemies. Yeah. So here we have a strong leadership consisting of God-directed prophet plus a military individual who leads a coalition of tribes to win a victory in behalf of God's people, the northern tribes of Israel.
You know, Barak is mentioned in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. Deborah is not mentioned in that list, and I had often wondered why
Deborah got left out.
Deborah was left out. She seems clearly as a woman of faith. Why isn't she instead of Barak in that list? But when you think about it, Barak shows a lot of faith too, in the way that you were emphasizing earlier.
Intense bravery, my gosh. You know.
Going against this army. But in his trusting of Deborah's leadership and prophetic ability and guidance, he's putting a lot of trust and faith in God.
Yes.
So a good example there.
Well, we wish we had more time so we could share some of the interesting wording in chapter 5, the great poem, the Song of Deborah, as it's called. But we're out of time. But we have learned that God can provide the underdog a way through His guidance and His strength. So there are more lessons of this type coming up. Next week it's Gideon. We'll learn about him. So come and join us, and may God's blessings rest with you this week.
This has been In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson with Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible from Milligan College, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible of Milligan College. Join us again next week for another lesson from the International Bible School lesson text. This has been a production of the First Christian Church Television Ministries.